Hi there, John Wilkinson, History Made Easier. I hope this video is going to add to your understanding of the causes of World War II. I'm going to do that, I hope, by looking at the war aims in World War I, because it's in those aims that I feel we really find the roots of the causes of World War II. I'm going to look first at the war aims of Germany, both in 1914 and as they developed as the war progressed, and indeed as those war aims began to be put into place. And then I'll move on and look at the war aims of Japan. So beginning with Germany. In September 1914, the German Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg had put together his controversial September programme, outlining Germany's war aims. At its core was the Mitteleuropa that was part of the Kaiser's Weltpolitik, a central European customs and economic union led by Germany and now Austria-Hungary. To the west of Germany, it would involve the annexation of Luxembourg, the control of Belgium, and the acquisition of its channel ports. Possibly the annexation of parts of northern France too. To its east, it would involve the end of Russian rule in the Baltic states and Poland, which would both come under German influence. Dominance of Central Europe would be complemented by another element from the Kaiser's policy of Weltpolitik, Middle Africa. In other words, German dominance in Central Africa. Then, in May 1915, a petition was sent to the German Chancellor from the 6 most powerful economic and industrial groupings with their own set of demands, including extensive gains once the war had been won. They wanted Belgium to be made economically and militarily subservient to Germany. The French were to lose their coastline as far as the mouth of the River Somme. France was also to lose her coal-producing regions. To the east, they wanted the annexation of at least part of Russia's Baltic provinces and the Russian territory to their south. In this way, Germany would acquire greater industrial capacity to the west and more farmland to the east. Germany's overseas empire was to be expanded too, no doubt at the expense of Britain and France. It's worth noting that a significant figure behind the petition was Alfred Hugenberg, the chief director of Krupp, who would later be an important supporter of Hitler in his rise to power. With the war well underway and with stalemate on the Western Front, but with gains made elsewhere and the hope of further gains, war aims were becoming a reality for the Germans. It occupied territory in the northeast, and the Germans set up 6 administrative areas, making one of their generals the Intendant General to oversee them. The population lived under martial law. Any form of political activity was banned, censorship enforced, and the courts were presided over by German judges. School teachers had to be German and lessons conducted in German. Ludendorff looked ahead to a post-war order in which Kurland, which is a region in today's Latvia, as well as Lithuania, would be ruled by a German prince and populated by German farmers. Hoping to recruit a national Polish army under German officers, the Germans went so far as to create a Kingdom of Poland in 1916, with Warsaw as its capital. Such an army, it was thought, would free German troops for the Western Front. However, it would be nothing more than a client state under German military, economic and political control, and the Poles didn't cooperate. As for Belgium, whose post-war independence Germany had promised at the outset of the war, Germany reached the point at which it wanted to retain considerable control over the country. A German military presence which would include the permanent German occupation of forts and garrisons, including Liège, and possession of the Belgian railways and ports, whilst Belgium would not be allowed an army of its own. So I think you can see the links between Germany's World War I aims post-1914 and those of Hitler's post-1939. Turning our attention to Japan at the beginning of 1915, Japan handed Germany its 21 demands. At the outbreak of the war, Japan had occupied the German concessions in China. They now required China to accept Japan's claims to those concessions. Japan must be allowed to strengthen its positions in the Shantung Peninsula and Manchuria, as well as Inner Mongolia. Japan would extend its control of the South Manchurian Railway, and China must allow Japan to build railways connecting ports and other areas under Japan's control. Also, China's largest coal and steel works, situated in the British sphere of influence, would become a joint Sino-Japanese venture. Japanese citizens were to be allowed to lease and even buy land in Manchuria and other northern regions for agricultural and any other economic purposes, including mines. Japanese citizens were to be allowed to travel freely in Manchuria without interference, and Japan was to be allowed to build its own hospitals, schools and temples anywhere in China. China was not to cede any harbour or bay to any other power, and China was required to employ Japanese political, military and financial advisors, agree to joint Japanese-Chinese policing in some areas, and agree to buy arms only from Japan, as well as establish a joint Sino-Japanese arsenal in China. The Chinese military must also be trained by the Japanese. All but the last set of demands were accepted, and the last were only resisted because American and British pressure on Japan prevented them. In Japan's 21 demands made to China at the beginning of 1915, we clearly see an imperialist regime at work. This would take on a whole different perspective with Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and Japan's decision to strike out against America in 1941 in order to secure a Southeast Asian empire. So, the causes of World War II found in the war aims of World War I. I hope you found that interesting. As always, I thank you for listening, and as always, I remind you to check out my History Made Easier website. But for now, cheers.